It was a really sad day for Mr. James Harris's family. They were all gathered to say their last goodbyes to him when suddenly, a wolf came up to his coffin and bit his neck. Everyone was shocked, and you won't believe why the wolf did that. Mr. James Harris was an old man who lived in McCall, Idaho. He grew up there and only left when he joined the Army. After many years in the Army, he came back to his hometown and lived alone. He used to be married to his high school sweetheart, but they separated after 5 years. He had 2 daughters who lived in different towns, and he loved them a lot. Mr. Harris lived on the edge of town and liked to sit on his porch in the evenings to watch the sunset. He preferred to be by himself. He was nice to his neighbors, but didn't get too close to anyone. His only friend was a young boy named Williams, who lived nearby. Williams enjoyed visiting Mr. James and listening to his stories about the battlefield. Mr. James had worked as a medic during his time in the Army, helping injured soldiers. He had come home to retire after a long life of war and hard work and didn't miss the excitement of the battlefield. The old man led a simple, peaceful life. He had a routine: wake up early, take a morning walk, enjoy his tea, and spend the rest of the day reading on his porch. Sometimes, a boy named Will would visit for a chat, and other times, the old man would sit alone and watch the world pass by. People knew he liked his peace and rarely bothered him. Our story begins with a rumor circulating in town. There were stories about wolves in the nearby forest. Old James had heard these tales too, and he decided to stay away from the woods. It wasn't that he was scared, but he wanted to avoid any encounters with wolves or wolf hunters. He was too frail to run if he needed to, so he chose not to take any risks. After all, he was quite content on his porch. The old man believed that all life, even wildlife, should be protected. When some of his neighbors decided to hunt down the wolves for their safety, he didn't support their decision and made it abundantly clear. Unfortunately, they didn't listen to him and carried on with their search party. One evening, while sitting on his porch, Mr. Harris heard some rustling in his tool shed. At first, he wasn't sure if he had heard it or just imagined the sound, but he eventually picked up a flashlight to check out the shed. What he saw was totally unexpected. Sitting quietly between some boxes was a large wolf. James was alarmed for his safety at first, but soon realized that the wolf was barely moving. Then he realized why. It was bleeding from a gunshot wound on its leg. James took one look at the wolf and decided the animal was barely strong enough to move at all, let alone jump up and attack him. He couldn't let it die. Just as he was about to get closer, the man heard some voices and a knock on his front door. The wolf bristled and snarled, but old James shushed it. Of course, the animal couldn't understand him, but he trusted that it would remain quiet anyway. The old man left the shed and shut the door behind him. 3 young men stood in front of his porch and asked if he had seen a wolf run past. Since he usually sat outside watching or reading, Mr. Harris replied that he had been busy inside his house and hadn't seen anything suspicious, and sent the young men on their way. Then he entered the house, got some medical supplies, and headed to the shed. The old man cautiously opened the door and found the wolf in the same spot where he had left it. As he moved closer, the wolf stayed still, breathing with difficulty and whining in pain. It seemed like it knew that the man wanted to help him. The former medic examined its leg and took the bullet out, then dressed the wound with clean gauzes. He spent the next few days feeding the wolf in his shed and treating its wounds. Within those few days, the two bonded. Mr. Harris now spent his evenings with the wolf, petting it, and making sure it was comfortable. He was cautious and never let the wolf be seen by his neighbors. For someone who liked to be alone, this was not too difficult to achieve. One night, the wolf felt strong enough to walk around, so Mr. Harris led it to the woods and set it free. The predator hesitated for a bit, but then ran off. Their story could have been just a short parenthesis in their lives, but soon became something more. Every few weeks, the duo met at night in the old man's shed, where he would feed the wolf. As time passed, these visits became less frequent, but they never stopped completely. Life, as old James knew it, returned back to normal, or so he thought. Mr. Harris usually did his grocery shopping himself, but on a fateful morning, months after this first encounter with the wolf, he felt extremely tired and called on his young friend Will to help him out. He wrote a list and gave it to the young boy, who went to the store and got the groceries he needed. He was happy to help his friend and promised to be back soon to talk some more. The next morning, Mr. Harris made French toast for breakfast. As he sat there eating and reading that morning's paper, he felt a tightness in his chest and dropped the piece he was eating. Sensing that something was wrong, old James dialed 911 before he fell to the ground and passed out. When help came, it was too late to save James. The man was no longer breathing. Upon moving him to the local hospital, it was confirmed that the whole town was sad to hear that old James was dead. Though he kept to himself most of the time, he was a steady figure in the community, and he had been kind and friendly to so many people. On the day of his funeral, family and friends gathered to pay their last respects to Mr. Harris. The coffin lay out in front while eulogies were read out. Suddenly, something unbelievable happened. Out of nowhere, a wolf entered the church and started racing towards the coffin. The funeral attendants were startled and scurried out of the way, but the real surprise was yet to come. The wolf reached into the coffin and grabbed the dead man's throat. It didn't pull or drag on the man's neck, but kept still for almost a minute, puncturing his skin with its fangs. Afterwards, it let go of old James and ran back into the forest. People at the funeral were still shocked at what had just happened when an even stranger thing occurred. Right there, Mr. Harris choked and gasped for air. Some people watching got scared and ran away, but a few of his family members rushed to help him. They called an ambulance right away, and Mr. Harris was taken to the hospital. The doctors there acted quickly, and he became stable. News spread through the town that something strange had happened to old James, and a wolf seemed to have saved him. His family wanted to know what had really occurred, but the truth was hard to believe. A surprised doctor explained that the wolf had saved Mr. Harris by doing something like a tracheotomy. When the wolf grabbed Mr. Harris's throat, it accidentally made a cut that opened his airways. He hadn't actually died. He was having a severe allergic reaction called anaphylactic shock. The French toast he had eaten that morning had gluten in it, and he was highly allergic to it, which had closed his airways and made him appear dead. It turns out that Will, the young boy, didn't know about Mr. Harris' allergy and had bought him the wrong type of bread during his last supermarket trip. When old James woke up, his family told him what had happened, and he kept asking about the wolf. They said the wolf had run away into the forest, and he worried he'd never get to say thank you. A few weeks later, Mr. Harris came back home from the hospital, hoping to see his friend again. One quiet evening, his wish came true. He looked up from his porch and saw the wolf watching him in the dark. He hurried over, hugged his faithful friend, and thanked him for saving his life. The wolf gently licked his face and then ran off into the woods. Mr. Harris never saw the wolf again, but he always remembered it. What do you think of this story? Let us know in the comments section. Thank you.